Everybody, Mr. Lake here, and today is the first guided reading lesson of this week, and we are going to do something a bit different. Okay, we have got some extracts, some bits of a book called The Twits by Roald Dahl. Okay, now Roald Dahl is one of my favourite children's authors. He wrote loads of really great books like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, George's Marvellous Medicine, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and The Twits is one of those books that he wrote, okay? Now, I like his books because I think they're really funny, and they always made me laugh when I was little, and they still make me laugh now, to be honest, so hopefully you'll enjoy this one. Now, it is a bit tricky. It's certainly one of the hardest things we've attempted to read. But that's why I've got this video, okay? Because today our job is to read fluently, alright? But I'm going to be helping you and we're going to work on this together, okay? So, before I get onto the extract, let me just give you a little bit of context. I'm just moving myself out of the way there. I'm going to put myself on Mr. Twit. There we go. That's quite funny. Okay, so let me give you a bit of context, a little bit of background information about the Twits. So, in the story of the Twits, we've got these two main characters, Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit, okay? They are married. Now, they are nasty, horrible people, and they're quite disgusting as well. And throughout the book, they play nasty tricks on each other. So, already in the story, before the point we're going to read, Mr. Twit has hidden a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed, and at one point, Mrs. Twit feeds Mr. Twit worms in his spaghetti, okay? So they like playing pranks on each other, basically. Now, in this extract, the chapter we're going to read today, Mr. Twit has just convinced Mrs. Twit that she's shrinking, okay? And he's done that by adding a little bit of a bit of wood onto like the chair legs, so that she's reached the point where her legs are dangling on the chair when she sits down. So she shouldn't know that the chair's getting bigger. She thinks she's getting smaller, okay? So Mr. Twit has convinced her that she's shrinking and she needs to be stretched out by balloons, okay? So this chapter that we're going to read today is called, here it comes, there we go, sorry about that. So this chapter is called Mrs. Twit Gets a Stretching, okay? So, you'll notice I've got the Mario logo here, because what we're going to do is I'm going to be Mario, you guys can be Luigi. So when you see Mario, that means it's my turn to read. And when you see Luigi, that means it's your turn to read, okay? And we're going to cover this one bit at a time together. So I'll read it, and then I want you to pause this video and have a go at reading it yourselves. Got it? Okay? So let's crack on. So, here we go. Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a glass cylinder for filling balloons. He had fixed an iron ring to the ground. Okay, so I've just read the title of the chapter, Mrs. Twit Gets a Stretching, and that first paragraph. What I'd like you to do now is, let me change it so it's Luigi. There we go. What I'd like you to do now is read that same bit. So you're reading the title and this first paragraph, this first block of text here, okay? So hit pause now and have a go at reading that. Okay, hopefully you've done that. If not, hit pause again now before I move on to the next bit. Okay, so back to me. And I'm now going to start from the beginning again, but rather than just read the first paragraph, I'm going to go all the way down to the end of the second paragraph here. So from here, the title, all the way down to here, okay? So here we go. Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a glass cylinder for filling balloons. He had fixed an iron ring to the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string and when it was filled up with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Okay, so I've read there from the title to the end of the second paragraph, okay? So that first bit we've already done, we're just adding a bit more onto it, okay? So your job now is to hit pause, okay, and have a go at reading those first two paragraphs. So hit pause now, please. Okay, so hopefully you have attempted that. All right, let's go back to Mario again. And this time I'm going to try and read all of that text on the screen there, okay? So here we go. Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a glass cylinder for filling balloons. He had fixed an iron ring to the ground. Stand here, he said, pointing to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied round her neck, some he even tied under her arms, some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. Okay, so I've now done the whole bit. Okay, if you want to see that again, just rewind, go backwards a bit. Alright, but if you're ready, it's now your turn to hit pause and have a go at reading all of that text on the screen. Okay, so hit pause now, please. Okay, so hopefully you had a good go at that. Now we're going to go on to the next bit of the extract, okay? So this time I'm just going to read this first bit first, okay? It's only 2 lines. So here we go. We've got dialogue here, by the way. We've got those speech marks which tells you characters are talking. So first I've got Mr. Twit talking, and then it's Mrs. Twit talking, all right? So here we go. Can you feel them stretching you? Asked Mr. Twit. I can, cried Mrs. Twit. They're stretching me like mad. Okay, there we go. You can do voices if you want, up to you. But that is the first bit I want you to read, so just those first 2 lines. So over to Luigi, hit pause now, and it's your turn to read a bit. Okay, so hopefully you had a good go at those first 2 lines. Now let's do what we did before, so back to me again, and we're going to add this paragraph in as well. So the first 2 lines and this paragraph, alright? So here we go from the top again. Can you feel them stretching you? Asked Mr. Twit. I can, cried Mrs. Twit. They're stretching me like mad. He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. Okay, so there we go. We're now reading then from the start up to the end of this second paragraph here. Okay, so you know what to do by now. Hit pause and have a go at reading that, please. Off you go. Okay, so hopefully you had a good go at that. What I'm now going to do is do the whole thing. So from the top down to the bottom again. All right, so here we go. It's all going to be familiar though. And the good thing about this activity, by the way, guys, is that by just building it up gradually, we get better and better at reading it. Okay, so here we go. Can you feel them stretching you? Asked Mr. Twit. I can, cried Mrs. Twit. They're stretching me like mad. He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground? She gasped. If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye for me. And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Okay, so there you go. That's the whole bit then. Now it's your turn. So from the top here, right down to the end there, hit pause now, please, and have a go at reading that. Okay, so hopefully you had a good go at reading that. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to read through the whole thing, all right, and then it's over to you guys just at home to read through it again, maybe read through it a couple of times as fluently as you possibly can, okay? So trying to read as many of those words on sight without pausing too much, but also not going too quickly either, all right? So here we go. It'll be my turn and then the video will end and it's your turn to read at home, okay? So, Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors, where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a glass cylinder for filling balloons. He had fixed an iron ring to the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on its string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top half of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied round her neck, some he tied under her arms, some to her wrists, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can, cried Mrs. Twit. "They're stretching me like mad." He put on another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye for me." And that's what gave Mr. Twit his second nasty idea. Okay, so that is the extract. You've been sent this in your resources pack. So I'd just like you now just to have another go, this time at reading the whole text like I just did. Read it a couple of times if you'd like to, and try and read it fluently, okay? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this extract. We've got more Twits later on this week. I will see you next time.